You received gifts from me. They were accepted. But you don't understand how to think about the dead. The smell of winter apples, of hoarfrost, and of linen. There are nothing but gifts on this poor, poor earth. Thanks.
Hi. It's hard to follow a great poet like Jennifer, but I remember so many occasions when the Writers' Harvest drew from the riches of the Kenyon community, people like Jennifer, but also Kate Hedin and so many others who gave wonderful presentations. I think the poets and the writers at Kenyon are such a rich resource, and they speak in direct ways to the questions of poverty and homelessness and the need to care for each other. They're the voices from the heart of Kenyon. The work of Rural Cause and Food for the Hungry, Empty Bowls, all of those things throughout the ages have really brought our attention to poverty in Knox County. There are about 62,000 residents of Knox County. The poverty rate is 15.6%. 1/3 of those are under the age of 18, 11% over the age of 65, 10% are listed as working poor. There were, back in the early spring, 5,500 applications for supplemental nutritional assistance. That spiked to 6,500. It's now about 6,000. So as you listen to these writers, think about the way in which they're touching the heart of all of us to remember that we are one family of this community, and there are so many people who are in need. Thanks.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is A. Sheikh, and I'm a current senior English major at Kenyon College and also a really lucky Kenyon Review intern. But one of the other things I do on campus is I am editor-in-chief of Sunset Press, which is Kenyon's first and only student-run publishing press. So, usually in a typical year, we do a lot of virtual readings, we publish student chapbooks, and we kind of celebrate the student literary life on campus, and also focus a lot on outreach and community that we're part of as students and also as a larger Kenyon community. And so today we're really, really grateful to be able to partner with the Kenyon Review to help fundraise for a local Knox County nonprofit, the United Way, which is doing really important COVID-19 relief work for our Kenyon community and those adjacent to it. And so any amount helps. There will be a link in the chat if you guys are feeling like if you would like to support us monetarily. And again, thank you so much for coming to this reading. It's a great lineup. And yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Claire Olsen. I'm a 2019 graduate of Kenyon College. I was also a Kenyon associate and intern at the Kenyon Review, which I think continues to be such a wonderful institution that does this outreach work and continues to contribute to the community in a really beautiful way. I originally queried for this event to try and create a platform for some Kenyon affiliated writers who might have work coming out in or around the pandemic and might not have been able to promote their work in a conventional way. So I'm really grateful for this platform that KR has given. And hope that we can get out the word and excitement about some of the work that we're sharing here today. There will also be some links in the chat to some of the writers' work if you're interested in looking at it more and want to support them as well. Again, thanks so much. And without further ado, I will kick us off by introducing our first reader. Kelly Forden is the author of 3 award-winning poetry chapbooks. Her novel and stories, Garden for the Blind, was chosen as a Michigan Notable Book. Her first full-length poetry collection, Goodbye, Toothless House, was published by Cattywampus Press in 2019. Her second short story collection, I Have the Answer, was recently published by Washington State University Press.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you to Kirsten and Claire and everyone at the Kenyon Review for this opportunity. I really appreciate this. It's been a hard time to promote a book. This is the first story from my collection, I Have the Answer, which is published by Wayne State University Press, and it's called The Shorebirds and the Shaman. Corinne's husband, Ethan, died in his sleep. Right before bed, they'd had one of their rote conversations, the same one they had every night. What time should I get up? Ethan was sitting on the side of his bed with his back to Corinne, fumbling with the alarm clock on his ancient phone. Should I get up for yoga or should I sleep in? He had just retired from 30 years as a high school math teacher and loved the fact that he suddenly had options. Blah, 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 Corinne said. Why do you ask me that every single night as if I actually care when you get up? Though it sounded awful in the retelling, she'd said this in a playful tone. They chided each other. That was their shtick. I've read sleep is as important as exercise. Maybe I should just rest. Well, you lucked out, Iron Man. Tomorrow is Thursday. They have spinning, not yoga. Bonus. He set the phone down on the nightstand and lay back down. That's the best news I've heard all week. 6 months later, Corinne could count on one hand the time she left the house. She worked remotely as a web designer, so getting dressed was optional. Now she ordered household items from Amazon and food from a local delivery service. She communicated with the shoppers via text and asked them to drop the bags off on the front stoop. Days were spent prone on the couch staring at her screen or the ceiling while listening to the Talking Heads' Once in a Lifetime, the song that had been playing when she'd met Ethan at a fraternity party their freshman year. Both anthem and omen, as it turned out. 6 months in, the most persistent friend, the only one who was still trying to engage on a regular basis, was Anne. Anne was a family therapist who practiced 3 days a week out of her house. Her husband was high up in his company and had not been seen during the daylight in more than a decade. Up until Ethan's death, Anne had always leaned on Corinne. In fact, the last time Corinne had consulted with Anne on any significant issue was back when her son Scott was a high school sophomore and had claimed that the pot smell emanating from the basement was Taco Bell takeout. Corinne had been horrified by the pot and the lies and had convinced herself that it was only a matter of time before Scott joined the small band of junkies who hung out next to the highway on-ramp. When she told Anne, Anne had not talked her off the ledge like a good therapist. She had also agreed and handed her rehab pamphlets. It had been Ethan finally who'd convinced her that she might be overreacting by reminding her that she was high the night they had met back in college. As I recall, you enjoyed your fair share of Taco Bell, he'd said. Skipping a little here. One morning when she was lying in bed contemplating a mid-morning nap, or more accurately, embarking on one, Anne called to see whether she was free to spend the weekend at her cottage on Lake Erie. I'm skipping again. In the end, Corinne agreed to the trip because the cottage had been one of her favorite places to visit with Ethan. Plus, it would give her something to tell Scott besides the fact that she had burned through 7 seasons of The Walking Dead in 1 week. I may not have risen from the dead, son, but I made it to Ohio. What Anne failed to mention until they'd passed Toledo was the fact that she'd invited other people for the weekend. They were all fellow therapists, she said. The focus of the weekend was the technique therapists referred to as constellation work, or more formally as systemic family therapy, that Anne had decided Corinne might benefit from as well. It's an alternative therapy, Anne explained, somewhat unconventional, but very cathartic as a grief management tool. Are you kidding me? Corinne's rage was so intense she felt like she might eject from the passenger seat and catapult into space. I knew you'd say no if I told you up front. You have every right to be angry. I promise you don't have to participate. I just want you to think about it. You can take part in the workshops, or if you don't feel like it, just hang out on the beach or take some long walks. When they arrived at the cottage, Corinne headed straight out to the deck to smoke a cigarette as an FU to Anne, who had posted no smoking signs on every available surface at her house and cabin. The lake was crystalline, not a cloud in the sky. A line of shorebirds was stationed on the rusty old boat launch. She and Ethan had signed up for a shorebird identification class last year on Belle Isle in Detroit. Now she peered down at the shorebirds and realized all she had retained were random names: plover, peep, snipe. She could never parse the identifying characteristics. Short bills, short legs, short necks, who knew? If Ethan had been there, he would not have been able to help her either. After the second class, he turned to her and whispered, "These birds are as indistinguishable as snowflakes." Thank you. I would like to introduce Annette Cavagaro. Annette Cavagaro is a gay, bigender, American-Israeli writer. Their debut poetry chapbook, Reality in Bloom, is forthcoming from Ursus Americanus Press. They live and roller skate in Brooklyn.
Thank you. So before I read this one poem, I just want to give a little content warning that it does have mentions of mental illness and sexual violence. So this is a poem from my chapbook that's coming out by the end of the year. Yeah. So this is called The Language of Trauma. The distance between that grave and standing here is my shadow's gray beam on green blades, and the tombstone's varnish reflecting body back to me. I never really wanted to die, except the time I did, reciting overdoses and hospital stays like saints and hymns, soothed by Smucker's Uncrustables and Uno games. One time I befriended a bruja who refused treatment by medicine that rejected her heritage, yet healed corners of humanity the psychiatrist never sought to touch. Abandoned by friends outside another Brooklyn bar, I float on flat, dampened cigarettes and flakes of glass. Glinting in tandem with bricks bent in windows, mirrored sight splitting sky in two. The air imprints my blazer with early spring chill. I hear an echo of my assaulter's name from a plastic bag flapping in overhead limbs, his laugh in the smile of a Happy Meal box mangled by tires. At my college reunion, I meet my old counselor at the only coffee shop on campus and watch his eyes dart as I abridge 5 years in 20 minutes. I wonder if this is what distance does, rot what was once honest and safe. After a sip of quiet, he recalls, there always seemed to be two things occurring. You were so hurt by life, yet so determined. I have been meaning to give eyes to my trauma so it can see itself healing. I have been meaning to give a tongue to my trauma so it can taste this poem's justice. After the fact, my suicide note sang to me in poetry, the language of trauma, rapturous thrums of saliva, latent sighs and heartbeats. And this is what I heard. I carry pain with me, have made my existence wait in solitude. I belong, I am needed. See happiness thrive. Do not overdose. This pain will end. Thank you. Next up is Caitlyn Horrocks. Caitlyn is the author of the novel The Vexations from Little Brown, which was named one of the 10 best books of 2019 by the Wall Street Journal. She is the author of story collections This Is Not Your City, published in 2011, and Life among the Terranauts, which is forthcoming from Little Brown in 2021.
Hi, thank you. It's wonderful to be here with these Kenyon writers, past and present, sort of taking some artistic support from each other and hopefully providing some material support also for United Way of Knox County. I'm going to keep this really simple and read the very beginning of the Vexations. It's the opening of the book, so there's absolutely nothing you would need to know. You might like to know that the Eric that's being referenced is the composer Eric Seti, which, whether you think you know his music or not, you've heard it. You've heard at least some of his pieces, you know, in an airport or in the back of a commercial, or, you know, as somebody like stares mournfully out a window. They're really beautiful. He was not an unambiguously gentle, beautiful person. He was a really difficult person. And that was part of what I wanted to explore in the book. Conrad doesn't have the key. He stands at his brother Eric's apartment door, waiting for one of Eric's friends to pull it from a trouser or jacket pocket. It's 1925, and all the men are wearing suit jackets despite the July heat, despite the fact that everyone except Conrad is a composer or a musician, and Conrad had always supposed them to be a breed apart, unconcerned with propriety. The only composer he's ever known personally was his brother, and how well did Conrad even know him? Not well enough for a key. Eric's friend Roger unlocks the door, but does not open it. He steps aside, gesturing for Conrad to do the honors. No one has entered Eric's apartment in the days since his death, and nearly no one in all the 27 years he lived here. Conrad pauses to feel and then set aside the guilt of violation. With both dread and anticipation, he pushes the door ajar. Dusty light filters in from the hallway, and slowly the contents of the apartment become visible. A great profusion of umbrellas and walking sticks, stacks of handkerchiefs, exactly 86 it will turn out, mountains of yellowed newspapers, a small table with a single chair, a battered piano. A wardrobe that, when they open it, will contain only 6 identical gray velvet suits. In the front hall sits a baffling gymnastic machine, like an insect of cracked rubber belts and leggy metal bars. Conrad steps in a pile of dog shit, whose provenance is a mystery since Eric never owned a dog. The waste is scentless, dried and crumbling. There is no stink, nothing on Conrad's shoes except a light chalky powder. The men move farther into the apartment, but there is no easy way to catalog Eric's possessions under the filth. After some discussion, a couple of the friends leave to ask the building concierge for the loan of a broom, a dustpan, whatever else might be spared in memory of the neighborhood's celebrity. Along with Roger, Conrad stays, searching in vain for some evidence as to how his brother could have emerged from this place every Sunday with his beard trimmed and collar white, standing on Conrad's doorstep to be let in for dinner. He sits on a piano bench that groans under him. The joint's gone so loose he stands again. Roger turns, frowning, even indignant, perhaps because Conrad knows nothing about music. Ignoring him, Conrad wonders if it should have been Philippe here with him instead. Or maybe not. Philippe never knew anything about music either. Conrad does not arrange his hand to make any particular sound, simply settles his fingers onto the white keys at the far right end of the keyboard. Roger winces, perhaps expecting a shrill, tinkling cat call, but no sound comes. Conrad taps, then pounds his way up and down the keys. Silence. The chapter goes on from there. The book goes on from there. I am very pleased to introduce next. Alla Young is a poet from New Jersey. Her chapbook, The West and Other Mistakes, was published via Dancing Girl Press in 2016.
Hi, thanks so much for having me and thanks for coming. And thank you, Caitlyn. I'm going to read from a more recent collection. All you really need to know is Nell is like me and also not me. There's a slightly longer poem and then 2 really short ones. Nell as tragedy. I tell her I don't always know if I know nothing. Like, for example, I am always thinking about tragedy, which I am pretty sure I know and know I know nothing about. I know a girl who once pierced her own ears with a pin. This was a tragedy, this was not a tragedy, but a good trick in a pinch. Aristotle said that tragedy has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that this is crucial to our understanding of the idea of tragedy. Plot sequencing is a tragedy, and middles without endings are tragedies. Endings without beginnings aren't tragedies though, because they are just beginnings. Aristotle's definition of tragedy is not a tragedy, because it is just someone's idea about something, which happens to be tragedy. Ideas are not tragedies unless you forget them. Forgetting is a tragedy. Athenian feminine tragedy was performed entirely for men. This is a tragedy. In my life, Lynn Heginian repeats the line, "For we who love to be astonished." This is a tragedy, for even astonishment can be a tragedy. The incessant multiplication of astonishment, that too is tragedy, because anything unceasing and unending is tragedy. Of course, astonishment is also the opposite of tragedy, because it is the absolute crux of everything, like joy, which some might say is not at all the same thing as tragedy. Sometimes I think all of New York City is a tragedy. Central Park in late winter is a tragedy. Crocus bulbs beginning to bloom, that is a tragedy. Snow after calendar spring is a tragedy, but cold without snow is one of the sincerest tragedies on earth. Like all of ours, Nell's tragedies are multiple, but the most tragic of all is the way she loves and is allergic to other people's cats. Once I walked outside to the side yard and she was laying, smiling, under the elm tree by the cedar fence, 4 cats sleeping on her small checkered chest. This was a joy and also a tragedy, the sound of a gas station ice machine when you are looking at the Rockies, like how that is a joy and like how that is also a tragedy. On meteors. The sky is a black ranunculus. We've watched it explode. New Jersey, 1999. The third brightest star, a dirty cat, lurches towards Florida's moon. She says, "You haven't really spoken to me in years." My whole entire heart. According to National Geographic, scientists have now developed the technology by which to grow tiny human hearts on spinach leaves. The pattern of intersecting veins in the leaves is like that of the human vascular system, scaled way down. Nell shared this recently on the internet. When I think of her sometimes, I think of her many admirers and her faux gold wristwatch, the cheap kind you can get at CVS by the hair clips. Her name on Facebook is my whole entire heart like a hot air balloon, but when she writes anything there, the site shortens it to my whole entire heart, as in on Tuesday, my whole entire heart was at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, or my whole entire heart has been enjoying this season's unusual rain. And so sometimes, even still, I picture that first summer in Ohio, her wrist in that watch and it ticking in the foxglove like time, like all the ways in which to regrow. Really happy to introduce Colin Ainsworth, who is a first-year MFA candidate at Columbia University in New York City. He is taller in person.
Hello. This is a piece called "He Runs to the Shine." The last time Ruth, not you. The last time I was here, I was really in here. I have been here. I know that I have been here. These people are in my home and they're watching my TV. The carpet below my feet has been walked on a lot. It doesn't look like grass anymore. It has a surface. It's like a thick and curly head of hair. I don't know what to say. I don't know what I can say anymore. It's my house. I should be able to say what I want. I should be able to say I should. They keep talking to this kid. I know this kid. This kid is in me. I am in this kid. He has his mom's cheeks, which are my cheeks. He talks to the television. I did that, but I don't remember what I say. It all goes away, but it doesn't really leave. None of it really leaves. I remember how it started. I could tell you what my parents would say, but nothing they actually said. My father wouldn't have said anything, and my mother wouldn't have said anything about Jackie Robinson. They didn't talk much at the end either. I don't remember if they said anything. My mom said to me once, when you get to my age, everybody asks you to tell them something, like you got something wise to say. Truth is, Ruth, the only thing you figure out when you get as old as me is that there ain't nothing to know except that you know nothing. You don't know nothing. I don't know a thing, and everything I know how to do, I can't. This little shit with my name is on his knees in front of the TV. His face is too close to the screen and I don't say anything. I can't say anything. The camera is doing the same. There's a woman on the screen who has blemishes that I wouldn't notice if she was wearing makeup and if the goddamn camera wasn't so close to her face. She's beautiful even if she's older than she wants to be. Her hairline is low and her cheekbones are high and she enunciates like a knife on a cutting board. Her tongue is upsetting and precise. She is saying things as well, but she isn't saying anything. She trades with a man whose jawline could support a staircase. His hair can't move and his teeth are lily white. His voice is like gargled honey and he's talking about a man killed by another man in this town today. He says it'll tell us about the snow after the break. This child has his face inches away from the screen. If this man speaking has dimples, this child would know. Ruth, no, Mom. I mean, Ruth in front of the TV, back up, you'll go blind. Nothing bad is ever going to happen to him, and I am wrong, wrong, wrong. This kid is me. I am in this kid. I am trying to scream because I'm trying to talk, and my body cannot. I never learned sign language, but that wouldn't make a difference today. I could have forgotten sign language by now, but I don't remember that either. The screen goes to black, and the tailored man and woman, and the camera goes back to being too close. If that camera was pointed at me, I would look down its barrel and say, my name is Ruth Decatur, and this is the saddest I've ever been. This kid is running around the room now on this green carpet. His brother, who looks to be twice his age, is asleep on my chair. He is by this tree. There's a tree in this room. It's making my eyes hurt, but this kid runs to the shine. He's picking up bottles and shaking them, and a woman who is calling me mom is telling him to stop. He does. If there's a brightness in this room, this kid runs to it. He's old enough that he almost understands what it is. If a light is reflecting off a window, he wants to look at it closer. There's a light shining off the cabinet that is a gun rack. He's standing on his chair to look at it. Ruth, Mom, not Ruth, honey, get down from there. She's now making him sit and talking to him low. The only thing I can hear is the parts of the words that don't match up when she's pointing at the kid's face. This kid doesn't know what he did wrong. I killed animals with those guns. She watched me do it. We had days where we would sit all day in the cold before I would kill animals. She's beautiful. Teresa is beautiful. This kid is now looking at these guns in this cabinet, but not like he wants to grab one. He doesn't really know what they do. That's why he's looking at them. He doesn't understand why what he did was wrong. He doesn't understand why what he did was dangerous. He doesn't understand why what he did was wrong. This is the feeling. This is what I feel. I'm blindfolded and there's something in my hands. I've held this thing many times. I am being told this by me, by my head, but I also know this to be certain because I can recognize it. I can remember this weight, this texture, but I cannot name this something in my hands. There are words on my tongue, but they're incorrect. It is similar to lighting a firework that will refuse to go off, a dud. This is the feeling of a dud. If I had the ability, I would stand and walk to this cabinet, glance at this kid as I did it, and I would take the longest one I could hold, the most weight I could support, and I would look down its barrel and say, my name is Ruth Decatur, and this is the saddest I've ever been. This is the feeling. This is what I feel. Daylight is bright and night is dark, and I no longer run to the shine. I know what it is. I can even see it. I know I can run to the shine, but I don't know how. Everything I know how to do, I've forgotten. This kid runs to me now, away from Teresa. This kid is me. I am in this kid. He holds his legs where I'm sitting, and he holds my legs where I am sitting and presses his face against me, and he turns his face outward to breathe. I touch my hand to his back. This kid looks at me and says his Mary. I can't say it, but I say, my name is Ruth Decatur, and this is the happiest I'll ever be. Thank you. Very happy to introduce Claire Olsen, who's a queer writer and 2019 graduate of Kenyon College. She's the 2019 winner of the Newfound Prose Prize. Her chapbook, Things from the Creek Bed We Could Have Been, debuted in May 2020. Her undergraduate thesis was recently named a finalist for the Cream City Review's 2020 Summer Fiction Contest. She was awarded the 2020 Emerging Writers Fellowship from the Center for Fiction. Her work has been published at the Kenyon Review Online, the University of Kentucky's Graduate Literary Journalism Journal Limestone, the LA Review of Books, Newfound Press, and elsewhere.
Thank you. Hi. So I'm going to read the first part of the first short story that is in the little chapbook that was mentioned. So I'll get started right away. The title is Alluvium, which means the sort of the soil and dirt and silt collected by a river as it's running downstream. Somehow they're still warm when they get to me, the peaches. I've been standing in the dark. I'm up to my red knees in a black creek, which runs under me like one of those quiet songs about house fires. I'm in my brother's boxers. Unbrushed blonde hair lifts my clavicle and then ends abruptly. Half a mile upstream stands my father in the same dark, with a box of peaches under his arm, black water lapping halfway up his calves. He lifts the orange globes out one at a time and takes a moment to write a word on their skins in permanent marker before setting them into the water. He pushes the first out until it takes to swimming like a fizzling spark can take to a damp match. Everything is terrifying eventually. The peaches are silent, bobbing worlds, fleeced with translucent hairs in the dying heat from my father's hands. I am not unlike them. In the dark water, my flashlight bluntly opens up the night in front of me. I'm watching for the black to hemorrhage into sugar and color. I'm 15 and cold, and in my hand is an empty burlap sack. The first fruit hits my sight from several yards away, a round, sweet exclamation floating through the night. I hum a song to myself, and it has no words, and it's about a house blooming red somewhere in Tennessee. I'm surprised to see the peach, surprised that it got to me, surprised that it's whole and legible and a peach. I pick up the fruit before it hits my leg and read its forehead, on which, in the clean script of my father, is darkly written, I. It's almost hot in spots, as if it had blood, and maybe it does, but I don't check. I deposit it into my bag and look back at the shining black creek, prying at it for flashes of minnows or the dull heads of smooth gray stones. I'm cold and waiting. My father is speaking silently with a marker over stone fruit. He stands, sending more sugar my way. My heart gets going when I see the second one, as if it were something sharp and fast instead of lethargic and tender. I think about my father's wire-rimmed glasses and anxious dreams that push sleep out from his brain and bed. I see the orange of the peach as a kind of smile, a ridiculous and happy shade to have your body be. I copy its face with my own. I pick it up and listen to it. It says, am. I think about my father, and I agree with him that he is existing somewhere, even if it's across the night and in newer water than what I'm standing in. I wonder if it's over, if this was all he had to say. He is a man that gets up at night and goes onto our roof to sing or yell or let the wind undo him until he cannot breathe. He is a man you have to wake up for. My mom wakes up for him and brings him down from things like you'd bring down a kite, just trying to lower the red, wired thing out of the air before the current drops out and it plummets. He's not dangerous, just someone who likes to climb. And here comes the third peach, which is warm like the others. This one reads, leaving. That word is long enough to make me turn the world, the palmed fruit, to read it all. It burns a little to read, and the peach's own inexplicable heat simmers in my palm as if it was on its way to cobbler, having long forgotten the slight bite of a cold-fronted summer evening dangling from a tree branch. It's got no sound to it, but I set it over my father's voice like a buttered pan over a stove. It sizzles noiselessly in my palm, and I swear it burns. He picked a good spot in the creek for me to stand. It's not too deep. It's right after a bend, and it's narrow, so my chances of missing a peach are small. The fruit is choked into my sight, and I can find it easily without looking all that hard. This does nothing to dispel my amazement for the plan and the fruit and that he's writing on it. But for what it is, I suppose he knows what he's doing, yelling at me as if from across a field, every word separate and strained and palpable. Another peach. This one almost hits my leg before I gather it up. There's more, apparently, in him. This one says, your. Not much belongs to me right now. I'm a small and gangly thing whose heartbeat comes from something contracting in her chest smaller than her own cramped fist. I'm usually warm and fast and not good. I'm usually about running and brambles and my own bare feet cussing down a stretch of summer-baked asphalt, but I am none of that right now, not with the peaches. I turn off the flashlight for a moment. The little half-mouthed sounds of the water go on sputtering, but the minnows stop sharpening the metal of their bodies on my eyes. The world has gone to ink. I remember the cicadas suddenly, which are everywhere so much they melt off from feeling real, like the air or the sun or the feeling of a chest being yours. Thank you, and I'm going to introduce the next reader. Celine Anja Rocha is based in New York City, where she is a candidate for an MFA in creative writing and teaches undergraduate writing at Columbia University. She has contributed fiction, nonfiction, and poetry to Pen Plus Brush, Broad Magazine, The Rational Creature, The Suburban Review, Haika, and Luna de la Cosecha.
All right. Thank you so much, Claire. So I'm going to read the beginning of a short story called Mango. Cristina was finally hungry, hadn't eaten since the airport pretzels 20 hours ago. She could tell it had been even longer for her father, probably the entire 3 days he'd been in Miami, and she was afraid to ask him to drive her to Gilbert's bakery, but she did. Of course, Alejandro said, rubbing his forehead. I just wasn't even thinking about that. He lingered for a few minutes, afraid to be gone for long, but when they finally did leave, he drove as calmly as ever, and they decided to order Cubano's plantain chips, croquetas de jamón. Gilbert's was as informal as always. The walls were still painted a deep charcoal, and signed photos of Celia Cruz and Gloria Estefan, Tito Puente, and Andy Garcia covered the wall to the left. Que tenga buen día, Cristina said, trying to smile at the hair-netted woman who handed her the paper back. She just nodded back. Don't eat in the car, it's a rental, Alejandro said. Cristina sighed, but waited. It was only a 10-minute drive. She heard her father's breath whistle out as he turned the ignition. When they arrived at the hospital, Cristina's abuelo was dead. Her abuelo, Alvaro, who had been sleeping in the corner chair when they left, was saying over and over, Amor, amor, ¿a dónde fuiste? Alejandro dropped the paper bag on the chair, looking like he might fall down. The nurse began apologizing in soft Spanish, saying they just missed her. Pilar had just passed 4 minutes with God. For a moment, Cristina refused to believe it. Shouldn't they have felt the death, like a car slamming into them as they pulled into the parking lot as they shut the doors? Cristina couldn't cry, or at least not for her abuelo, whom she loved, who taught her how to speak Spanish with poise, how to read the city of Miami like a grid so she'd never get lost. But for her stomach, which was rumbling and which was the reason her father had missed his mother's death. It's not your fault, Alejandro said, as Cristina began to shake, telling him she was sorry. Her husband was the one who needed to be here. Cristina was a grown woman, 25, and coming up and into live media in Boston. She knew it was childish to feel guilty about something that had been a coincidence. She knew her father wouldn't blame her, at least not after a while. But she couldn't bring herself to believe him. She wanted him to be angry with her. Cristina knew she killed her abuela by removing her father, Pilar's only son, and the pork sandwiches sat uneaten in their paper bag until Cristina's mother got off a plane and arrived at the apartment on Southwest 38th Street. My father has dementia. What am I going to do with him? Her father sobbed, while Cristina's mother rubbed his back. My mother was the one who knew how to take care of him. Marion was the one whose consulting job relocated the family to San Francisco. Cristina, 5 years old and knowing hardly any English. She had never needed to, living in Little Havana, where everyone spoke Spanish, white and black and brown people too, except for Marion, who refused to get fluent. Once, waiting in line for a Thanksgiving turkey, she told Cristina it was because she didn't like the way Cubans looked at her in Sedano supermarket, or rather, that they hardly seemed to look at her at all. They didn't like that she didn't speak Spanish, that she wasn't even Afro-Cuban, but just African-American, just American. But my in-laws were always good to me, Marion had said. They always included me in everything. They called it Cuban Christmas. Cristina knew her mother was relieved to leave Miami, but for Alejandro's parents, who would never have left except to go back to Cuba, and they would never go back to Cuba. He can't stay here on his own, Marion said now to Alejandro. She began to tear up as the old man shuffled around the apartment, looking for his wife. Her hair was misted by the heat. Yes, we'll have to pack up the apartment, said Alejandro. Cristina knew that this meant she and her mother would be the ones packing it up. Her father had disintegrated, even before, 2 days ago, when he'd called to tell her about Pilar's stroke, and Cristina said, I'm going to Logan Airport now. Alejandro barely protested, though he reminded her she'd have to take off work at the news station. He had this handled. He was fine. You might not even get here in time. She's dying. The doctor says she'll die. There will be a funeral. Come then, Alejandro said. Cristina went anyway because she knew that this was what it would be. Her father was hopeless, and Cristina was so worried about him that she forgot to let the horror of it all sink in herself. Her healthy grandmother of 70 years was dying. The evening before, they'd gone to the funeral home. Pilar was still alive then, but tubed up and fading. The heart attack was taking too long to kill, and Cristina thought it unfair. She'd signed the papers because Alejandro was sobbing into his hands, his black hair growing oily. The mortician smiled and handed him tissues. Cristina watched, almost amazed, but her father had always managed to evade the machismo of his parents' generation, never scared to cry. He was handsome too, and when he cried in public, which was not infrequent, people always smiled at him gently, like this funeral director. And if they were in Miami and Cuban too, they would chatter on about el que algo quiere, algo le cuesta. Things would work out. She wished she could cry like that without having to worry that she'd add awkwardness to the air, elicit false sympathy. Pilar paid for Alvaro's and her own funeral 20 years before, back in the 90s. It had taken her that long to save up for them. She wanted a nice Catholic ceremony, a simple coffin, all her friends from the island, whichever were left. So Cristina and her father left with full wallets, and Cristina still with an empty stomach and her anxiety driving away any desire to eat. Back to the hospital, because Alejandro hated staying away, at least until the next afternoon, when Cristina was finally too tired to be stressed, and she'd asked him for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for reading. And thank you to everybody who made time to be here. If you enjoyed tonight's events, please consider donating to the United Way through Sunset Press and checking out our author's work. Write them a little note. We're in COVID times. We all love to hear from each other. This chat is making me so happy. The event has been recorded, so if there's anything you'd like to rewatch or share, it'll be available on the Kenyon Review website within a few days. And please join us on November 4th for our next reading with Elisa Li-Ying Sao-Chan, author of A Fish Growing Lungs. You can pre-register on the Kenyon Review Reading Series page. Everybody stay well and take care. Thanks so much.